Everything just changed. In a stunning revelation, Denise Boggs has come forward with the truth about Joni Lamb, and it's nothing like what Daystar viewers expected. Hidden details, long-suspected tensions, and shocking confessions are finally coming to light. For years, the truth was buried under loyalty, image, and silence, but not anymore. Denise just pulled the curtain back, and what she exposed could shake the entire foundation of Daystar and everyone who trusted it. When Marcus Lamb was lying in his hospital bed during those final days, everything about his voice carried weight. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't confused. He was focused. As the founder of Daystar and a man of deep faith, Marcus knew his time was short. But more importantly, he knew what he wanted to leave behind. And that wasn't money, fame, or a polished image. It was direction. It was legacy. He asked for Denise Boggs. To many, Denise wasn't just a counselor. She was a confidant, someone Marcus trusted with the deeply personal matters that others never heard about. So when he asked his daughter Rachel to place a phone call to Denise from his hospital room, it wasn't just a casual request. It was urgent. It was intentional. When the call connected, Marcus spoke directly to Denise, and what he said would echo far beyond that room. He told her to write everything down, not later, right then. This wasn't the talk of a man struggling to hold on. This was a leader making sure his final instructions were recorded and remembered. Denise later said that Marcus's words weren't vague or emotionally driven. They were structured, deliberate, and full of purpose. He wasn't reminiscing. He was laying out a plan. He told her plainly that he believed it was time to pass Daystar into the hands of the next generation. He said, "Joni and I built Daystar, but we built it so the children could carry it on." That was the heart of it. And more than just a general idea, Marcus had specific names and roles in mind. Jonathan Lamb, his son, was to step in as the primary leader. Marcus described him as the first lamb who needed to take the mantle. But Jonathan wouldn't be doing it alone. Marcus saw his wife Susie as a vital partner, someone strong enough to support him spiritually and emotionally. He didn't stop there. Rachel and Rebecca, Marcus's daughters, were each given clear roles in the future leadership. Rebecca's husband, J.W., was also included in the plan. One person, however, was missing from that vision: Joshua Brown, Rachel's husband. At the time, Joshua played an active role in Daystar's operations, and his absence from Marcus's plan was noticeable. Denise said she sensed it was intentional, though Marcus chose not to explain. She didn't press him. She respected the boundary. What mattered most was Marcus's final command. "You make sure it gets where it needs to go," he told her, and Denise did. She shared his instructions with Joni Lamb and other key family members. According to her, there was no confusion. There was no ambiguity. Marcus wasn't rambling in his final hours. He was handing over the keys to the kingdom with precision. He didn't want Daystar to fall into disarray or be divided by power struggles. He wanted unity. He wanted faith to guide the transition. But what came next would shake everything. Instead of the peaceful transition Marcus had hoped for, something entirely different happened. Joni Lamb took full control of the network. Jonathan, the man Marcus had publicly prayed over and privately prepared for leadership, was removed. Not just let go, but allegedly pushed out under pressure, spiritual abuse, and silence. Denise watched as the very vision Marcus had fought to put in place began to fall apart. And that's what makes this so painful. This wasn't a hidden plan whispered in secrecy. This was a direct message from a man who knew his time was ending and wanted his legacy to continue through his children. But now, as the dust settles and stories come to light, one can't help but wonder, how could something so clear be so easily ignored? Denise has held onto that call like sacred ground. Because for her, Marcus's words weren't just instructions. They were a final act of love. For his family, for his ministry, and for the people who believed in him. And maybe, in the end, they were also a warning. Long before Marcus Lamb ever ended up in a hospital bed, he was already thinking about the future. Not just his family's future, but the future of Daystar, the global Christian television network he had built from the ground up alongside his wife, Joni. He wasn't just a preacher or a businessman, he was a visionary. And like many leaders who truly care about their work, Marcus understood that legacy only matters if you prepare for it. Over the years, Marcus didn't just lead Daystar. He watched, he prayed, and he listened. He paid attention to how his children carried themselves, not only on camera, but in private, in prayer, in meetings, and in the quiet moments that don't get noticed. To him, this wasn't about choosing a successor based on who was the most polished or popular. It was about spiritual calling. It was about alignment with God's purpose. That's why, when the time came, his mind was already made up. During that final, meaningful call to Denise Boggs, Marcus laid it all out, with no hesitation. Jonathan Lamb, his son, was the one who would take the lead, not just because he was family, but because Marcus believed with all his heart that Jonathan had been called by God to carry the vision forward. He didn't use poetic language or soft suggestions. He said it directly. Jonathan is the first lamb who needs to step in. It wasn't a guess or a hopeful wish. It was a firm decision rooted in years of spiritual preparation. But Marcus didn't stop at naming Jonathan. He knew that leading a ministry like Daystar takes more than one person. So he described a whole structure, a family system of leadership designed to keep the ministry aligned with its mission. He envisioned Jonathan's wife, Susie, not just as a supporting figure, but as a co-laborer, someone who would be standing beside him, shoulder to shoulder, helping carry the weight of spiritual and organizational responsibility. Rachel and Rebecca, Marcus's daughters, weren't left out either. He assigned them clear roles and honored their strengths. And in a very intentional move, he also included Rebecca's husband, JW, in this new vision. Marcus wanted Daystar to remain in the hands of people who not only loved the ministry, but understood the weight of its calling. To him, this wasn't about power. It was about stewardship. But something stood out to Denise Boggs as she listened to Marcus talk. There was one person missing. One name that had been surprisingly absent from the entire conversation. Joshua Brown. Joshua is Rachel's husband. At the time, he was actively involved in Daystar's operations. On paper, it would have made sense for his name to be included. After all, he was part of the family and already had a public-facing role in the network. But Marcus didn't mention him. Not once. Denise noticed it right away, and while she felt the urge to ask why, something in Marcus's tone stopped her. This wasn't the time to question or dig deeper. Whatever the reason was, Marcus had clearly made a decision, and Denise respected that silence. She later described that omission as loud, not because it was said, but because it wasn't. And sometimes, what isn't said speaks even louder than what is. The rest of the conversation continued with clarity and purpose. Marcus told Denise to make sure everything he said was shared. He made it clear that these weren't just thoughts. These were instructions. These were marching orders. You make sure it gets where it needs to go, he told her. And Denise didn't take that lightly. She delivered Marcus's message to the people he had trusted most. Joni, his children, the leadership within Daystar. From that point on, the expectation was simple. Honor his wishes. Follow the plan. Let the children lead. But that's not what happened. Instead of watching his carefully laid out plan unfold, the public saw something entirely different. Jonathan was removed. Not reassigned, not stepped down. He was let go. Fired. The man Marcus had chosen, prayed over, and prepared was cut out of the organization he was meant to lead. And with that, so was Susie. What had been framed as a smooth transition now looked like a total rejection of Marcus's last request. And here's where things got even more confusing. Reports began to circulate that Jonathan's departure hadn't been peaceful. According to insiders and those close to the family, Jonathan was allegedly met with spiritual pressure, manipulation, and even surveillance. The environment around him had become hostile. Those who still believed in Marcus's vision started referring to the people behind the scenes, the ones resisting Jonathan's leadership, as the Daystar Mafia, a group not defined by family ties, but by control and secrecy. It was like Marcus's voice had been erased. His plan had been replaced by something else entirely. Denise was heartbroken, not just because the plan had fallen apart, but because Marcus's intentions had been so pure, so prayerful, so full of purpose. He didn't create a hierarchy to stroke egos or play favorites. He built a spiritual blueprint designed to protect the mission. And now, that blueprint was being ignored. But here's what's most troubling. No one in leadership ever publicly addressed Marcus's plan. Joni Lamb, who had taken control of the network, never mentioned it. There was no open conversation, no family roundtable, no statement to the public. Just silence. And with that silence came growing suspicion, growing frustration, and growing division. For many viewers who had followed Daystar for decades, this wasn't just a family matter. It was a test of integrity. People gave to this ministry because they believed it was led by faith, by transparency, by the principles of the gospel. And now those same people were watching in real time as a deeply spiritual moment, a father's dying wish, was quietly dismissed without explanation. And what about Joshua Brown? His exclusion remains one of the biggest mysteries in this story. Did Marcus see something others didn't? Was there a deeper issue, a conflict that he didn't want to speak about? We don't know. But what we do know is this. Marcus had a plan. It was thoughtful. It was deliberate. And it was ignored. That silence is still echoing, and the real question now is, will anyone break it? When Marcus Lamb passed away, he left behind more than just a television empire. He left behind a vision, a ministry, and a spiritual legacy that had touched millions around the world. For decades, Daystar had been a beacon for Christian viewers looking for hope, healing, and truth. And through all of it, Marcus had stood as a steady leader, a man who believed deeply in his calling and made it his life's mission to spread the gospel through media. But what was supposed to be a peaceful handoff of that legacy quickly turned into something else entirely. In the beginning, things looked calm. The family mourned. Tributes poured in. Joni Lamb, his wife and longtime ministry partner, stepped forward publicly as the new face of Daystar. She gave speeches about Marcus's vision, his love for the ministry, and the importance of moving forward with strength and unity. To viewers, it may have looked like a natural continuation, just the next chapter in a story of faith, but behind the scenes, a very different story was unfolding. According to those close to the situation, the moment Marcus died, power dynamics inside Daystar shifted fast, and instead of following the spiritual succession plan Marcus had laid out so clearly to Denise Boggs, naming his son Jonathan as the next leader, things took a sharp turn. Joni Lamb didn't just step in temporarily, she took full control. Within a matter of months, Jonathan and his wife Susie were quietly removed from leadership. No public explanation, no family discussion, no formal announcement of the change, just silence. It wasn't just disappointing, it was disorienting. To the people who had known Marcus well, it felt like betrayal. Because Marcus hadn't simply hinted at Jonathan's future role, he had made it his final mission to ensure that his son would carry on the work. And now that son was gone. Inside the Daystar building, employees were confused and divided. Some had always admired Jonathan's quiet strength and humble spirit. They believed in the way he led, gentle, prayerful, not flashy. Others were more loyal to Joni, who had been with the network from the very start and had a commanding, public-facing presence. What had once been a unified workplace began to feel like a battleground of loyalties. People chose sides, whispers turned into rumors, tension hung in the air, and then came the term no one expected, the Daystar Mafia. That's what some insiders and former employees started calling the group of people surrounding Joni, those believed to be influencing decisions, protecting power, and silencing opposition. It sounded dramatic, but the stories behind it were real. Reports of intimidation, surveillance, and control, allegations of spiritual pressure and manipulation. It wasn't just a shift in leadership, it was a struggle for control over the future of the entire ministry. For those on the outside, this slow unraveling wasn't visible at first. Daystar still aired its programming, the cameras kept rolling, sermons were preached, music played. But behind that polished front, a storm was building. Supporters who had followed the ministry for years began to notice that something was off. Viewers started asking questions. Longtime donors grew uncomfortable. Some pulled back their giving altogether. Denise Boggs, who had carried Marcus's final words like sacred instructions, tried to stay quiet at first. But as she watched the plan get dismantled, piece by piece, she couldn't stay silent. She knew what Marcus had said. She had heard it with her own ears. And she believed it was her responsibility to speak out, so she did. She shared the details of her final phone call with Marcus. She explained how clear and specific his vision had been, and she revealed how far things had veered off course. For some, her testimony was a turning point. It confirmed what many had already suspected, that Daystar was no longer being guided by the spiritual compass Marcus left behind. And at the center of it all was Joni Lamb. To many, Joni had long been seen as a pillar of strength, especially after Marcus's death. She was the face of the ministry, the host of Johnny Table Talk, and a symbol of resilience. But now, her leadership was being called into question. Why had she rejected Marcus's plan? Why was Jonathan cast aside? And why was the ministry behaving more like a business empire than a spiritual family? Joni didn't offer many answers. When she spoke publicly, she framed the changes as necessary and in the best interests of Daystar. She denied the rumors. She stayed composed. But the silence around Marcus's wishes only made the questions grow louder. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Susie chose a different path. They didn't fight back in the media. They didn't give interviews or make accusations. They simply disappeared from the screen and from the story. But their absence said more than words ever could. The people Marcus had trusted to lead had been erased from the future he had carefully planned. What began as a ministry built on prayer, humility, and mission now seemed stuck in a struggle for image, influence, and control. Marcus's spiritual legacy, the very foundation of Daystar, was fading behind a curtain of power politics. And here's the heartbreaking part. This wasn't just a family conflict. It wasn't just about leadership or business. It was about faith. It was about the message being preached versus the actions being taken behind the scenes. And for many viewers and supporters, it caused a painful kind of spiritual confusion. How could a ministry built on truth ignore the truth? How could a network that preached obedience to God so easily dismiss the dying wishes of the man who built it? The story of Daystar has now become more than just a church scandal. It's a mirror being held up to every ministry that grows too big, too fast, and forgets why it started in the first place. And for those still watching, those who once believed with all their hearts in what Daystar stood for, the question is no longer what happened, it's can it be redeemed? The power struggle continues, but the legacy? That's still up for grabs. Even after all the reports, the leaked calls, and Denise Boggs' emotional revelations, something still doesn't sit right. People who have followed Daystar for years, who once believed deeply in its mission, are still left asking questions that no one seems willing to answer. These questions haven't faded. If anything, they've only grown louder, more urgent, and more unsettling. Because this isn't just about a ministry, it's about trust, integrity, and whether people of faith are being told the truth. The biggest question is the one everyone keeps circling back to. Why were Marcus Lamb's final wishes ignored? He made himself clear. Multiple witnesses have confirmed it. He spoke directly to Denise Boggs from his hospital bed, laying out a very specific, thought-out plan for the future of Daystar. Jonathan Lamb was to take the lead. His sisters, Rachel and Rebecca, had their roles. Their spouses had been included, with one name missing, noticeably so. It wasn't vague or emotional, it was structured and purposeful. So how could something that important be set aside so easily? Some have tried to justify it by saying Marcus wasn't in his right mind, that he was sick, that maybe Joni knew better. But Denise pushed back hard on that idea. She said Marcus was sharp, intentional, and deeply focused. It wasn't a ramble. It was a father's final mission. If Joni Lamb really believed in honoring her husband's legacy, why didn't she honor the one thing he asked for most? Then comes the next question. What really happened to Jonathan and Susie? Their firing wasn't public, and there was never a full explanation. All that's known is that they're gone, quietly removed. No interviews, no statements, just silence. Some say they chose to step away. Others believe they were forced out. What's clear is that they've been erased from the picture Marcus painted. And if that decision was truly made out of wisdom and strategy, why not be transparent about it? Why not share the reasons openly? The silence itself has become suspicious. Ministries built on trust shouldn't need to hide decisions behind locked doors and closed meetings. When people give their money, time, and faith to a ministry, they deserve honesty. The absence of it makes room for something far worse: doubt. Another question that won't go away is about Joni Lamb herself. Once admired as a faithful wife, TV host, and ministry partner, her image has shifted dramatically. She now sits at the center of what feels like a spiritual and organizational storm. Why didn't she speak up about Marcus's succession plan? Why hasn't she directly addressed the claims Denise made? Was she protecting the ministry or protecting power? And who are the people advising her behind the scenes? The rumors about a Daystar Mafia, a small group of insiders allegedly controlling decisions and suppressing dissent, sound like a conspiracy theory at first, but the fact that so many former employees have quietly confirmed stories of intimidation and manipulation makes it hard to ignore. Is there really a group keeping tabs on everyone? Is the leadership of Daystar more about loyalty than calling? And then there's the money. Daystar has long relied on donations from loyal viewers, people who give sacrificially, sometimes even beyond their means. Those viewers believed they were funding ministry, not luxury, so when they learned about the private jet, the extravagant spending, and the unexplained finances, they felt betrayed. Which leads to another simple but powerful question: where did the money really go?